But these are the men who led the country astray, sir. Surely it's only right that they should acknowledge their responsibility. It's a cowardice that these men refuse to admit their mistakes. And when those mistakes were made on behalf of the whole country, why then it must be the greatest cowardice of all. So says the son-in-law of Masuji Ono, lobbying something of an attack against his wife's father for his work as an artist in Japan in the time leading up to World War II. I'm Veronica, and welcome back to the Reading Chronicles. This is Book 2 in my Year of Kazuo Ishiguro series. Ishiguro has a quietly devastating way of writing about heavy topics with a calm elegance that belies the horrors they shield. In An Artist of the Floating World, retired artist Masuji Ono reflects on his past as his 26-year-old daughter Noriko endeavors to get married. A previous engagement having been broken off, Ono's eldest daughter, Setsuko, suggests that he speak to acquaintances before the prospective husband's family's detective can get a chance to do so, and this is to avoid any unnecessary misunderstandings. What we can gather through Ono's first-person narrative, one that begs the question of reliability as at times he is unsure of who said what to whom, is that he was once a sort of contract artist, churning out what are commissioned works, usually Japanese-looking things for foreigners. These include the typical cherry trees, carps, temples, and geishas, a sort of painting equivalent of getting a tattoo of a kanji character in one's 20s. Ono found his success in the pre-war pleasure district known as the Floating World, a place and time of drink and frivolity that preceded the time that the country entered into the war. It is through his meetings with former students and colleagues that we get an idea of the sort of work that he was eventually involved in leading up to that disastrous time. Told in 4 parts from 1948 to 1950 through visits with his daughters, Ono's past begins to unravel before us, even as he maintains a certain willful obtuseness about his past actions. Despite Ono's efforts to maintain a sense of righteousness, certain elements begin to poke through this facade. We know that Ono's son, Setsuko and Noriko's brother, is no longer with him, nor is his wife, their mother, and we're not told exactly what happened. We're only given insinuations that it had something to do with the war that took so many of the country's own. Ono also claims not to understand the ways of young people who have such bitterness for their elders and who seem to readily accept the new American ideals and ways. While they are distinct characters, in Ono we see a sort of spiritual successor to Etsuko's father-in-law Ogata in A Pale View of Hills. Although we do not fully learn of his work, he too is forced to own up to his actions perceived as sins by his country, and he too cannot understand the changes in culture following American occupation. In fact, this sort of reevaluation of actions of life is a central theme in Ishiguro's work. In a 1986 interview after the publication of An Artist of the Floating World, Ishiguro said, "I'm interested in how people justify to themselves the kind of life they have led. I'm interested in people who aspire to do something that is some kind of moral value in their eyes, something that will distinguish themselves, that will give their existence some kind of dignity. And I'm interested in people who try to do this and discover that, in fact, they are too ordinary to transcend the mediocre. I'm interested in that urge in people who want to actually leave their mark, who want to do something, and people who somehow come to terms with the fact that perhaps they don't have it in them. But nevertheless, they have to somehow find a way of looking at themselves that gives them dignity. And so I'm interested in periods of history, such as Japan just after the Second World War, where moral values did a kind of topsy-turvy, when a lot of people who had spent their lives devoting themselves to something they thought was valuable are suddenly told by the society around them that, no, sorry, you were doing the wrong thing all the time. In fact, you were contributing to something evil and will now condemn you. In that sense, we can see that this isn't really a World War II novel. nor is it inherently Japanese. Instead, Ishiguro is using this time in this place to examine a human need to make sense of one's life and to reassure oneself that one's actions have always been on the side of right. In fact, as I think about it, I'm not really a fan of World War II novels, and I can immediately think of a couple that are beloved on BookTube that I failed to find compelling. But Ishiguro's first 3 novels all focus on World War II, and I love them. I think that's because for Ishiguro, the war itself doesn't serve as a plot. The plot, if the novel can be described as having one, is a person's realizations of who they truly are and what they have done, and having to come to terms with that. And that is an inherently relatable conflict. The remains of the day will be a reread for me, and I don't remember exactly what happens, but I do remember that I loved it. In 2018, a TV movie version of the novel was released, starring Ken Watanabe as Masuji Ono. The movie offers quite a faithful adaptation. We see Ono insist that family status means little to him, and that he's never aware of his high social standing. He is overruled by his daughters when he tries to take charge of plans with his grandson, a representation of his loss of power in society. We see his troubled relationship with his father when he was young, a man who condemns his son's desires to be a professional painter, claiming they live in squalor and poverty, and that the world makes them weak-willed and depraved, only for this to stoke the fires of Masuji's ambitions even more. He insists that he doesn't know what Setsuko is talking about when she suggests that he be careful about the investigations from Noriko's prospective husband's family. We see the same uncertainty about what people may have said to him or what he may have said to others, lending him the shield of plausible deniability when it comes to accepting responsibility for his actions. We see the representation of the floating world where Ono spent his days as a young man painting, and we see how he was drawn from it. Although the book was written in English, the film is in Japanese, and it uses an old-fashioned version of the language. In an interview with Variety, Ken Watanabe said, "When I first read the novel, I wasn't convinced it was even possible. But the screenwriter, Yuki Fujimoto, created a script that's extremely simple and very profound. Of that script being in Japanese," he said, "I wasn't sure how to deliver that style of language to viewers in a way that was meaningful. Fujimoto turned it into a script in a very clear way. Still, the sentences are very difficult to understand. They include lots of exaggeration and modifiers. Of course, I'm in no position to judge the use of the Japanese language, but I can say that the film lovingly captures the subtle, almost fragile quality of the novel and Ono's misguided determination to hold on tightly to what he believes is true, even in the face of evidence to the contrary." For some final thoughts on the novel, here's what some reviews have said. In 2015, The Guardian named an artist of the floating world one of the best 100 novels, calling it pitch perfect, and that it both expresses Ishiguro's Japanese inheritance and captures the haunting beauty and delicacy of his English prose. An Artist of the Floating World is perhaps the supreme example of his art. It is at face value deeply Japanese, but many of its themes, secrecy, regret, discretion, hypocrisy, and loss, are also to be found in the 20th century English novel. In 1986, the book was shortlisted for the Booker Prize, and the Booker Prize Guide to His Works says, "Ishiguro's second novel, An Artist of the Floating World, is another masterclass in unreliability, one of the very best books in an oeuvre where the standards are high. The book is 206 pages, and I gave it 5 stars. Up next is The Remains of the Day, and I'll be taking a look at the Oscar-nominated movie for that one too. If you've read An Artist of the Floating World, let me know what you thought of it in the comments. That's all from me today. I hope you read well.